Ah, hello, dear friends, and welcome to the third part of this whispered read-through of Painters and Writers, an anthology by Carlos Peacock, a lovely old anthology that was published back in 1949. Places works of literature against works of art, paintings that are either directly influenced by or relate to one another in one way or another. So we're now moving on to 19th century French painters. We have a letter ascribed to Rainer Maria Rilke and Palace of the Popes in Avignon, J.B. Corot. We were able to arrange a few days' halt in Avignon. They have remained unforgettable, partly because of the town itself, its buildings and its environs, but also because during those days my friend held an undisturbed and somewhat intensified communion with me over many things. How should the house which the popes had raised up for themselves not appear mighty to me? I had the impression that it could not contain any interior at all, but must be filled up out of solid blocks, as though the intention of the excommunicated had been to heap the papacy with all its superweight into the scales of history. And in very truth, this churchly palace towers up over the antique torso of a statue of Hercules immured in the rocky crypts. Rainer Maria Rilke certainly had a fantastic way of words to get across the power of a landscape and building. Here we have Camille Pissarro's Le Louvre and Guy de Maupassant's Boule de Suif. In the intense stillness of the town, plunged in the deep repose of winter, no sound was audible save that vague, indefinable, fluttering whisper of the falling snow, felt rather than heard, the mingling of airy atoms which seemed to fill all space and envelop the whole world. I love that. It makes me, yes, when it is snowing, and there is that sound to falling snow, that it's in a way a feeling, not a sound. It's that close, almost muffled sound in your ears. It's very delicate but pervasive all at once. We have a Vincent van Gogh, the Yellow Chair, and Remy de Gourmand's Le Problème de Style. Even today, unfortunately, many worthy and sensible people think that an armchair in imitation Louis XV style is more artistic than a simple rush-bottom chair, and it would be difficult to undeceive them. In the distant provinces there are chair makers capable of making a rush-bottom chair which could be described perhaps as naive art. Bit of politics in the world of chair making. Auguste Renoir getting into some very famous paintings here. Le Premier Sortie and Ivan Turgenev's A Nobleman's Nest. One evening at the theatre, he caught sight of a young girl in a box on the first tier, though at the time no woman could pass his stern gaze without causing his heart to flutter. It had never beaten so violently as this time. Leaning on the velvet border of the box, the girl hardly moved. A sensitive, youthful animation lit up every feature of her dark, rounded, and attractive face. A graceful intelligence shone in her lovely eyes, looking out with soft attentiveness from under delicate eyebrows, and the quick smile of her expressive lips, in the very carriage of her head, arms, and neck. She was beautifully dressed. By her side sat a wrinkled, sallow woman of 45, wearing a low dress and a black cap, with a toothless smile on her strained but vacant face. It's a little bit harsh on the 45-year-old there, but hey, his eye is taken. Young love, eh? We have a Manet there with La Musique Hôtelière and Guy de Maupassant's Fort Complement. Along the wide wall massive and artistic curves through grassy lawns, throngs of people sitting on iron chairs watch the passers-by, while in the little shade paths, winding like streams, groups of little children crawl in the sand, run about, or jump the rope under the indolent eyes of nurses or the anxious watchfulness of mothers. The enormous trees, rounded into domes like monuments of leaves, huge horse chestnuts, whose heavy verdure is lighted up by red and white clusters, the showy sycamores, the graceful plane trees with their trunks artificially twisted, add to the charming perspective of large, undulating lawns. I find this an interesting exercise. Whispering the prose really draws out the consonants and the vowels of the text, and you can hear when something is beautifully written and poetic. It sounds sumptuous, that the consonant sounds and the vowels interplace so elegantly. It's the equivalent of a lovely meal. We've got another Vincent van Gogh here. Sunflowers. Is it Vincent van Gogh or Vincent van Gogh? Let me know in the comments which one is the correct pronunciation. William Blake's The Sunflower. Ah, sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime where the traveller's journey is done. Armand de Guillaumin's Le Moulin de Muret, and Henry James's Madame de Maure. Longmore thought he had never seen anything so characteristically French. All the French novels seem to have described it, all the French landscapists to have painted it. The fields and the trees were of a cool metallic green, the grass looked as if it might stain your trousers, and the foliage your hands. A great red-roofed, high-stacked farmhouse, with whitewashed walls and a straggling yard, surveyed the high road on one side. From behind a transparent curtain of poplars, a narrow stream, half choked with emerald rushes and edged with grey aspens, occupied the opposite quarter. The prospect was not rich, but it had a frank homeliness which touched the young man's fancy. It was full of light, atmosphere, and diffused sunshine, and if it was prosaic, it was soothing. I do think of, yes, French white farmhouses, red-tiled roofs, very French. Pierre Bonnard's The Window, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Dichtung und Wahrheit. Every window on each side was a frame to a natural picture, which stood out vividly in the soft sunlight. I thought I'd never seen such bright mornings, nor such splendid evenings. Reminds me of my honeymoon in Santorini. Every view, a picture, absolutely lovely. D.H. Lawrence, Women in Love, against James Tissot's The Picnic. It's a lovely painting, that, isn't it? The character there is this gentleman in repose, taking his tea, leaning across to awkwardly fill it. They sat on the northern side of the grove, in the yellow sunshine facing the slope of the grassy hill, alone in a little wild world of their own. The tea was hot and aromatic. There were delicious little sandwiches of cucumber and of caviar, and winey cakes. Another Vincent van Gogh landscape with cypress trees. Always love his skyscapes. Just have a life and a thrum of energy to them. And a letter from him to his brother Theo. The half-ripe cornfields are at present of a dark golden tone, ruddy or golden bronze. This is raised to a maximum of effort by opposition to the broken cobalt tone of the sky. Obviously always thinks of life in technicolor. Manet's La Severus de Box. Good old, yeah, pub or a show, a performance, a theatre. Gustave Flaubert's L'Éducation Sentimentale. It was a little cafe as immobile as if he had been part of the furniture. Having passed through the successive stages of coffee, grog, punch, mulled wine, and even wine and water, he had fallen back on beer, and every half hour he uttered the word "bock." Monet's The Year, Sunshine and Snow. I love that. Such lovely pastel shades. Jacques Chardon, Eva. I walked along the bank of the Seine this morning of frost, between crystal brushwood. The poplars on the other bank are scarcely etched in airy lines upon the mist. You guess at blue sky. Seagulls skim these ghostly trees with a white wing. More money. Miliva Gonzalez. And Yeats is the cutting of an agate. Since then I have discovered an antagonism between all the old art and our new art of comedy, and understand why I hated at 19 years Thackeray's novels and the new French painting. It was not until Sir Hugh Lane brought the Eva Gonzalez to Dublin, and I had said to myself, how perfectly that woman is realised as distinct from all other women that have lived or shall live, that I understood I was carrying on in my mind that quarrel between a tragedian and a comedian, which the devil on two sticks in the sage showed to the young man who climbed through the window. Obviously had a lasting impression on Yeats. Very famous Monet, La Passion aux Nymphes. Against Marcel Proust's Du Côte de Chasson. As the banks at this point were thickly wooded, the heavy shade of the trees gave the water a background which was ordinarily dark green, although sometimes, when we were coming home on a calm evening after a stormy afternoon, I have seen in its depths a crude blue that was almost violet, suggesting a floor of Japanese cloisons. Here and there on the surface floated, blushing like a strawberry, the scarlet heart of a lily set in a ring of white petals. It's incredibly romantic. Paul Cézanne's Passage Rochon, and George Kissing, in a letter describing the landscape of Provence. The peculiarity of the appearance of the landscape is, I believe, that at a little distance everything seems translucent. You seem to see the light of the sky through the mountains. I have thought of sketching outlines, but the idea is absurd. There are no lines, only gradation of colour on colour. Here we have James Tissot's officers and ladies aboard the HMS Calcutta, and a good old excerpt from Jane Austen's Persuasion. The Admiral, after taking 2 or 3 refreshing turns about the room with his hands behind him, being called to order by his wife, now came up to Captain Wentworth, and without any observation of what he might be interrupting, thinking only of his own thoughts, began with, "If you had been a week later at Lisbon last spring, Frederick, you would have been asked to give a passage to Lady Mary Grierson and her daughters. Should I? I'm glad I was not a week later then." The Admiral abused him for his want of gallantry. He defended himself, though professing that he would never willingly admit any ladies on board a ship of his, excepting for a ball or a visit, which a few hours might comprehend. "But if I know myself," said he, "this is from no want of gallantry towards them. It is rather from feeling how impossible it is, with all one's efforts and all one's sacrifices, to make the accommodations on board such as women ought to have. There can be no want of gallantry, Admiral, in rating the claims of women to every personal comfort high, and this is what I do. I hate to hear of women on board, or to see them on board, and no ship under my command shall ever convey a family of ladies anywhere if I can help it." This brought his sister upon him. "Oh, Frederick, but I cannot believe it of you. All idle refinement women may be as comfortable on board as in the best house in England. I believe I have lived as much on board as most women, and I know nothing superior of the accommodations of a man of war. I wonder what happens to Frederick. Do you think he has a change of heart? I love the pose of this lady here. Henri Frederick Amiel's feeling against Alfred Sisley's La Beauvoir. For me, the charm of midwinter is that it increases the consciousness of life, tones up the body, and warms the heart. Frost is exhilarating. Snow is like the crack of a whip. It excites and intoxicates even the animals. Nature, turned into mineral, becomes fantastic, and everything that stirs the imagination is immediately clothed with beauty. I agree. I prefer snow over any other form of weather. For that very reason, perhaps. Edgar Degas' Femmes and Jules Romain's Les Douces de la Vie. She is seated, she smiles at me, but she does not rise. That central part of her face is as pretty, or rather as beautiful as ever, but the eyes are less brilliant. There is a touch of heaviness about them. Their expression is not so much melancholy as resigned. What I mean is that experience, the memory of what she has lived through, has not added to her glance any additional mystery, any sad profundity, any veil of wonder and questioning. All that has happened is that the eyes have lost a little of their keenness, and with them those demands on life, those proud challenges of which they were the medium. Similarly, something of her nobility has gone too, something that corresponded to a high tension of living in a being of fine metal, the unquestioning claim which she used to have on destiny. The line of her mouth is still familiar to me, but when she was 14 her lips, without being disdainful, had a proud tranquillity. Now they have grown slightly flabby and disdainful, and seem to express some inner collapse. They are pleasant still, but they no longer intimidate the onlooker. The rest of her face has become even heavier. The white complexion touched with gold is still there, but the colour of the blonde is a shade too visible. The cheeks have grown larger, especially in their lower parts. The line of the chin has begun to lose itself in fat. The whole body is tending to plumpness. One can guess that the arms are too fleshy, the thighs too thick, but her smile says, "Yes, my dear, life is like that." Who does Jules Romains think he is? To be talking about somebody like that. Look to yourself, Jules. Love this Surat here, La Bagnade. Look at that, just the colours, the impression of the people is so lovely. And WNP Barbarian, June the 8th, the Journal of a Disappointed Man. Brilliantly fine and warm, across the meadow and up the hill to the Millleat, where we bathed our feet in red. The sun seemed to burn into my very bones, purging away everything that may be dark and threatening there. The physical sensation of the blood flow beneath the skin was good to feel, and the heat made every tissue glow with radiant well-being. When I got up and opened my eyes, all the colour of the landscape vanished under the silvery whiteness of the intense sunlight. As much as I love the love the snow, I am looking forward to the sun that summer brings, the restorative power of it. Here we have Puvis de Chavannes, beheading of St. John the Baptist, and the Gospel according to St. Matthew. When Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them, and pleased Herod, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask, and she, before being instructed of her mother, said, "Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger." And the king was sorry, nevertheless for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her, and he sent and beheaded John in the prison. Richard Jefferies, The Open Air against Vincent van Gogh's Field at Arles. A crude piece of ground, ruder and more dismal in its unsightly holes, could not be found, and yet, because of the reed grass, it is made as it were full of thought. I wonder the painters, of whom there are so many nowadays, armies of amateurs, do not sometimes take these scraps of earth and render into them the the idea which fills a clod with beauty. And Van Gogh has certainly done that there. A typical field, brought to life in all of its roughness and colour. It could take us his dances and his and a sonnet. I'm not going to read the French, it would be disrespectful to the language, so I'm going to go with the English. Go without the useless help of beauty. Little ones with commonplace faces trump impudently priestesses of grace. Dancers put you in a class apart, heroic and distant. In your world one knows that queens create themselves out of distance and makeup. Suzanne Scholf, a lot of wisdom in that face. Rainer Maria Rilke again in a letter describing a self-portrait of Suzanne here. At the corners of the eyebrows, the powerful structure of this skull, which is wrought seemingly from the inside, comes into force once more, but from there, jutting forwards and downwards as though ramped onto the stubbly chin like a shoe, hangs the face, hangs as though each feature were hung on separately, with unbelievable intensity, and at the same time giving that expression, reduced to its most primitive elements of crass and gaping astonishment in which children and country yokels sometimes lose themselves, only that here the unseeing imbecility of their absorption has been replaced by an animal attentiveness which maintains a continuing objective vigilance in the unwinking eyes. And how great and incorruptible this objectivity of his gaze was, is confirmed in an almost touching manner by the circumstances that, without analysing or in the remotest degree reading his expression from a superior standpoint, he made a replica of himself with so much humble objectiveness, with the credulity and extrinsic interest of a dog which sees itself in a mirror and thinks, there is another dog. That may be rather verbose, but I absolutely love that critique, that synopsis of what Rainer Maria Rilke is seeing there. There is another dog. Yes, I can see that. There's another dog. Paul Gauguin's flower piece, lovely colours, love the vase. Charles Baudelaire's prose poems. It seems as though an ever-growing radiance were making the objects sparkle more and more, as though the excited flowers were burning with the desire to rival the azure of the sky in the intensity of their colours, and that the heat, rendering all perfumes visible, were causing them to rise towards the luminary like flying fireworks. Louis Anquetin's The Absinthe Drinker. Looking a little out of it, as you might if you were drinking absinthe on the regular. George Moore, of My Dead Life. If I had not lingered, I should have missed an exquisite hour of meditation, and meditations are as necessary to some as absinthe is to others. Of course, at one point in history, of course, absinthe was the patron, the patron drink of the arts. Writers and artists imbibing it for its hallucinogenic qualities. James Tissot's Ball on Shipboard and L.H. Myers' The Clio. As he leant over the side of the ship, his reflections became more and more nebulous under the influence of the light and heat. By turning his head a little to the left, he could watch the movements of the brightly clad, cool-looking company under the awning. He wasn't at all sure that civilization, in the ordinary and slightly gross sense of the word, wasn't the best thing in the world, and that this yacht wasn't the fine flower of civilization. The Democrat, looking on, might grind his teeth with ethical rage, the highbrow might sneer, and the artist fume, but the fact remained that the air of Mayfair was sweeter than that of Hampstead, Bloomsbury, or Chelsea. Almost photorealistic, this image. The colours just absolutely pop. The definition and the texture of the flags and the dresses, there's just such a kinetic energy to that painting. It's wonderful. There we have La Forense, the law courts. Almost like a kind of Les Miserables depiction here. And André Gide's journals. In the jury box again, I look at my colleagues. I imagine these same faces on the opposite bench, badly outfitted, unshaven, unwashed, their hair uncombed, with soiled linen or with none at all, and that fearful, hunted look in their eyes that comes from a combination of worry and fatigue. What would they look like? What would I look like myself? Would the judge himself recognize under that frightful disguise the respectable man? He would have to be very clever to distinguish the criminal from the member of the jury. We now move on to, I believe, the final part of this anthology, contemporaries, both British and foreign. And when we say contemporaries, this must have been around the time of its original publication, which would have been around 1949, the late 40s. Picasso here, and his flowers, against E.L. Grant Watson's English Country. I turn away to look at the living flowers which stand rigid and calm, holding erect to their cup-shaped faces. They are awful in their loveliness, so awful do they appear that beauty is wedded to what is hideous. They are so naked, so shameless in their arrogance. If one has eyes, one should not dare to look at life too close. Wow, who heard him? That's a rather cynical view of the world, unless I'm interpreting that correctly. We have some stubborn pages here. Can I open it? There we go. Come on, you. Well, glad I did. Look at that. Paul Klee's A Girl's Adventure. What a fantastic abstract. Surrealist. James Joyce and Ulysses. I don't know why I was struggling to pronunciate that. He said I was a flower of the mountain. Yes, so we are all flowers, all a woman's body. Yes, that was one true thing he said in his life, and the sun shines for you today. Yes, that's why I liked him, because I saw he understood or felt what a woman is, and I knew I could always get around him, and I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading on until he asked me to say yes, and I wouldn't answer first, only looked out over the sea and the sky. I was thinking of so many things he didn't know of Molthy and Mr. Stanhope and Hester and father and old Captain Groves and sailors playing all birds fly, and I say stoop and washing up dishes, they called it on the pier, and the sentry in front of the governor's house with the thing round its white helmet, poor devil, half roasted, and the Spanish girls laughing in their shawls, and the auctions in the morning, the Greeks and the Jews, and the devil knows who else from all ends of Europe. Famously without punctuation there, quite a challenge to read. Sight read. E.M. Forster's Howard's End against Stanley Spencer's Ricketts Farm. In these English farms, if anywhere, one might see life steadily and see it whole, group in one vision its transitoriness and its eternal youth, connect without bitterness, until all men are brothers. Unite on the land, absolutely. Boris Utrillo's Place de Tertre, and Frederick Prokofjev's The Skies of Europe. This controlled and mellow city, like the face of someone we love, holds us spellbound with its almost imperceptible variations. At heart it never changes, yet sudden effects, finely manoeuvred alterations in hue produced by the weather, the light, the hour, resemble the fleeting changes of expression that come over a woman's face. Never violent nor challenging, always fugitive, conciliatory, those streets seem to be returning our gaze for a second, then glance most casually away again. Stunning portrait there by Picasso of La Chemise. And Thomas Hardy's The Return of the Native. Should there be a classic period to art hereafter, its faders may produce such faces. The view of life as a thing to be put up with, replacing that zest for existence which was so intense in early civilizations, must ultimately enter so thoroughly into the constitution of the advanced races that its facial expression will become accepted as a new artistic departure. Physically beautiful men, the glory of the race when it was young, are almost an anachronism now, and we may wonder whether at some time or other physically beautiful women may not be an anachronism likewise. The truth seems to be that a long line of disillusive centuries has permanently displaced the Hellenic idea of life, or whatever it may be called, when the Greeks only suspected we know well what their ageless imagined our nursery children feel. Sols and Georges renounce la Marie. That is disturbing, terrifying painting. Our hero had thought it necessary to take minute pains with his toilet. In vain was he informed that Apollina Mercurovina had 20 suitors, all of whom she had successfully ill-used and dismissed, that she was proud, fantastic, choleric, and often cruel, that she made her 2,500 souls suffer more than they would suffer in hell, and that she was abetted in this task by a woman who, like herself, had remained unmarried, and who, by her redoubtable activity, appeared 100 times more ferocious than her noble mistress. However, our friend wished to see and judge for himself, and so he presented himself, was duly received, paid his court, pleased the lady, became enamoured of her somewhat vigorous charms, made his offer, and was accepted. Then a day was fixed for the wedding. Maurice Utrillo's Port Saint Martin and Marcel Proust's A l'ombre de jeune fille plunged in a restless sleep, my adolescence embodied in one uniform vision the whole quarter through which it might be strolling, and I had never dreamed that there could be an 18th century building in the Rue Royale, just as I should have been astonished to learn that the Port Saint-Martin and the Port Saint-Denis, these glories of the age of Louis XIV, were not contemporary with them most recently built tenements in the sordid regions that bore their names. Edmund Bluntон's Undertones of War against John Piper, All Saints Chapel in Bath, which has been destroyed here. The old homes are razed to the ground, all but one or two which play involuntary tricks upon probability, balancing themselves like mad acrobats. The church maintains a kind of conceptual shape and has a cliff-like beauty in the sunlight. Marc Chagall's Le Poète Elange and Argentagonev's Sportsman's Sketches. A marvellously sweet occupation is to lie on one's back in a wood and gaze upwards. You may fancy you are looking into a bottomless sea, that it stretches wide below you, that the trees are not rising out of the earth, but like the roots of gigantic weeds are dropping, falling straight down into those glassy, limpid depths. The leaves on the trees are at one moment transparent as emeralds, the next they condense into golden, almost black green. Somewhere, afar off at the end of a slender twig, a single leaf hangs motionless against the blue patch of transparent sky, and beside it another trembles with the motion of a fish on the line, as though moving of its own will, not shaken by the wind. Round white clouds float calmly across and calmly pass away like submarine islands. And suddenly, all this ocean, this shining ether, these branches and leaves steeped in sunlight, all is rippling, quivering in fleeting brilliance. And a fresh trembling whisper awakens the tiny, incessant plash of suddenly stirred eddies. One does not move, one looks, and no word can tell what peace, what joy, what sweetness reigns in the heart. One looks, the deep pure blue stirs on one's lips a smile, innocent as itself, like the clouds over the sky, and, as it were, with them, happy memories pass in slow procession over the soul, and still one fancies one gaze goes deeper and deeper, and draws one with it up into that peaceful, shining immensity, and that one cannot be brought back from that height, that depth. It's a wonderful script that could almost accompany a meditation for sleep, couldn't it? Imagining that leaf dancing on its own. Augustus John's The Smiling Woman against William Cobbett's Rural Rides. It is curious that this race, the gypsies, should have preserved their dark skin and coal-black straight and coarse hair, very much like that of American Indians. I mean, the hair, for the skin has nothing of the copper colour as that of Indians has. It is not either of the mulatto caste, that is to say, there is no yellow in it. It is a black mixed with our English colours of pale or red, and the features are small, like those of the girls in Sussex, and often singularly pretty. The tall girl that I met at Titchbourne had most beautiful features. I pulled up my horse and said, "Can you tell me my fortune, my dear?" She answered in the negative. "Give giving me a look at the same time that seemed to say it was too late, and that if I had been 30 years younger, she might have seen a little what she could do with me. Very optimistic William Cobbett, also very biased. Having all sorts of problems with the pages at the latter end. This is the problem with the gloves. I like to wear the gloves to show reverence and respect to the works, but of course sometimes it means that they don't offer you the best amount of friction or traction to be able to part the pages. Here we go. Edouard Vuillard's The Mantelpiece in Charlotte Bronte's Villette. There were 2 oval miniatures over the mantelpiece, of which I knew by heart the pearls about the high and powdered heads, the velvet circling the white throats, the swell of the full muslin kerchiefs, the pattern of the lace sleeve ruffles. Upon the mantel shelf there were 2 china vases, some relics of a diminutive tea service as smooth as enamel and as thin as eggshell, and a white centre ornament, a classic group in alabaster preserved under glass. Of all these things I could have told the peculiarities, numbered the flaws or cracks, like any clairvoyant. John Nash's The Moat against Dean Swift's Journey to Stella. I am again endeavouring, as I was last year, to keep people from breaking to pieces upon 100 misunderstandings. One cannot withhold from them drawing different ways while the enemy is watching to destroy both. See how my style is altered by living and thinking and talking among these people, instead of my canal and riverwalk and willows. I feel that Dean Swift, the complexities and struggles of engaging and relating to others. Got Amadeus Modigliani. I'm a big fan of Modigliani. His Faces, yes. Against Mary Russell Mitford's Our Village. I plead guilty to a strong partiality towards that unpopular class of being, country boys. I have a large acquaintance amongst them, and I can almost say that I know good of many and harm of none. In general, they are an open-spirited, good-humoured race, with a proneness to embrace the pleasures and eschew the evils of their condition, a capacity for happiness quite unmatched in man or woman or a girl. They are patient too, and bear their fate as scapegoats for all sins whatsoever are laid as matters of course to their door, whether at home or abroad, with amazing resignation, and considering the many lies of which they are the objects, they tell wonderfully few in return. The worst that can be said of them is that they are seldom, when grown to man's estate, keep the promise of their boyhood, but that is a fault to come, a fault that may not come, and ought not to be anticipated. It's almost a kind of zoological reference of human beings, indicated by the class systems and structures of the time, I suppose. Wyndham Lewis is Le Sud. It's a wonderful image. Look at her face. It's just brimming with intent, perhaps contempt. And T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Madame Sosistris, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold, nevertheless is known to be the widest woman in Europe. With a wicked pack of cards, here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those are pearls that where his eyes look. Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here is the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant, and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man, fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking round in a ring. Thank you. If you see it, dear Mrs. Equidon, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. I must be so careful these days. George Braque's Still Life and Roger Fry's Characteristics of French Art. Those critics who like to speculate and generalise must often regret that the genre of still life has been so rarely cultivated throughout the course of European art, so much less, in fact, than was the case in China. Because it is in the still life that we frequently catch the purest self-revelation of the artist. In any other subject humanity intervenes. It is almost impossible that other men should not influence the artist by their prejudices and partisanship. If the artist rebels against these, the act of rebellion is in itself a defamation of his idea. If he disregards them and frees himself from all the commonplaces of sentiment, the effort still leaves its trace traces on his design, but the still life excludes all these questions and guards the picture itself from the misconstructions of those who contact with art is confined to its effects as representation. In still life, the ideas and emotions associated with the objects represented are, for the most part, so utterly commonplace and insignificant that neither artist nor spectator need consider them. It is this fact that makes the still life so valuable to the critic as a gauge of the artist's personality. Very interesting take. Alexander Young's Jackson, The Entrance to Halifax Harbour, against Charles Dickens' American Notes. Now we were gliding down a smooth, broad stream at the rate of 11 miles an hour, our colours flying gaily, our crew rigged out in their smartest clothes, our officers in uniform again, the sun shining as on a brilliant April day in England, the land stretched out on either side, streaked with light patches of snow, white wooden houses, people at their doors, telegraphs working, flags hoisted, wharves appearing, ships, quays crowded with people, distant noises, shouts, men and boys running down steep places towards the pier, all more bright and gay and fresh to our unused eyes than the words that convey them. I suppose this Halifax would have appeared an Elysium, though it had been a curiosity of ugly dullness, but I carried away with me a most pleasant impression of the town and its inhabitants, and have preserved it to this hour. Nor was it without regret that I came home, without having found an opportunity of returning thither, and once more shaking hands with the friend I made that day. Lovely account. Pablo Picasso's Pharmacies and Théophile Gautier's Nuit de Cléopâtre. The spectacle of the ancient world is something so crushingly discouraging, even to those imaginations which deem themselves exhaustless, and those minds which fancy themselves to have conceived the utmost limits of fairy magnificence, that we cannot here forbear recording our regret and lamentation that we were not contemporaries of Sardanapalus, or Teclathalasar, or Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, or even of Elagabalus, the Emperor of Rome and priest of the sun. I hope I pronounced those names well. A Paul Nash landscape from a dream. Love that. It's like something you'd find on an album cover, like a Pink Floyd album or something. S.D. Coleridge's A Late Sermon. The dreams which we most often remember are produced by the nascent sensations and inward motiniculae, the fluxions of the walking state. Hence, too, they are more capable of being remembered, because passing more gradually into our waking thoughts, they are more likely to associate with our first perceptions after sleep. Accordingly, when the nervous system is approaching to the waking state, a sort of underconsciousness blends with our dreams, that in all we imagine as seen or heard, our own self is the ventriloquist, and moves the slides in the magic lanthorn. We dream about things. But there are few persons of tender feelings and reflecting habits who have not, more or less, often in the course of their lives, experienced dreams of a very different kind, and during the profoundest sleep that is compatible with after-recollection states of which it would be scarcely too bold to say that we dream of the things themselves, so exact, minute, and vivid beyond all power of ordinary memory is the portraiture, so marvellously perfect is our brief metempsychosis into the very being, as it were, of the person who seems to address us. A very strange deja vu throughout reading that. I wonder if it was indicated by the source material. Paul Nash's Landscape at Iden, against Arnold Bennett's The Journals of Arnold Bennett. Up in the woods, greenish-brown, black colour of wood cut and uncut, coming often in the distance, or rather flaming out with a spark or spot of ochreish raw wood, the end of a fresh-cut log. All the upward paths lead up to stop at either a farm or a wood-cutting place. I can almost smell the description there. And that is it. That concludes our journey through Painters and Writers, an Anthology by Carlos Peacock. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey. I've found this book wonderful. It was occupying an almost hidden space on the bookshelf and the bookcase, but I'm very glad that I pulled it out and decided to have a look at it. It was a wonderful exploration of paintings and writings. I hope you enjoyed it too. I look forward to having you join me next time.